Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7 here on Broadcasting Scotland. My name's Kenny McBride and I'm joined this evening by two excellent guests. Firstly, from the All Under One Banner organisation, Andrew Wilson. Andrew, how are you doing?
Kenny, good evening. I'm well, thank you. How are you?
I'm not bad at all. And on the other side of me, we have rural leader Daye Tucker. Daye, how are you doing this evening?
I'm very well, thank you.
Excellent. Well, we start this evening, as we always do, with our coronavirus statistics update. And as of 2 p.m. today, a total of 432,849 people in Scotland have been tested through NHS Scotland labs and UK Government regional testing centres. Of these, 413,442 were confirmed negative, 19,407 were positive. There were 49 new confirmed cases of COVID-19 in Scotland today, but once again, another day with no new reported deaths. This will, of course, be an underestimate of the number of cases, as not everyone with the virus will necessarily display symptoms and not everyone will necessarily get themselves tested. Once again, we do urge you, if you are showing symptoms of any kind, please do book a test as quickly as you can. Of the people who have tested positive, 254 were in hospital last night, 3 of whom were in intensive care. And the number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by the coronavirus infection remains at 2,491. This number only includes those who have died in hospital having received a positive test for the virus. The latest UK daily figures available show that 41,381 patients who tested positive for COVID-19 have sadly died from their illness, an increase of 12 since yesterday. The number refers to deaths in all settings, not just those in hospitals. And as it's Tuesday, we also have the Office for National Statistics report for England and Wales in the week ending 7th of August, which was week 32 of the year. In week 32, total deaths in England and Wales were once again slightly below the 5-year average. As we've discussed here before, this is in part due to more of the most vulnerable people dying earlier in the pandemic, meaning fewer deaths overall now. Again, deaths in hospitals and care homes were well below average, but deaths at homes increased to make up most of the difference. This is also partly related to mortality patterns earlier in the pandemic, but also due to the fact that the NHS is still not functioning at normal capacity for most conditions. The total number of deaths related to the novel coronavirus registered in week 32 was 152, 24 of which were in Wales, which again is some way below the 392 recorded in the UK government's daily tally for that week. The total number of deaths in England and Wales since the beginning of the pandemic, where COVID-19 is mentioned on the death certificate, now officially stands at 51,879. And before we go any further, I just want to remind you, if you want to join the conversation here on Scotland at 7, you can do so on Twitter. If you're following us at Broadcast Scot, just use the hashtag Scotland at 7. That's hashtag Scotland AT and the number 7. We will be flashing some of those up on the screen there, as you can see throughout the show. But our first story tonight, the Scottish Parliament today voted to reject the UK government's internal market proposals in a motion proposed by Constitution Secretary Michael Russell. Europe Minister Jenny Gilruth told MSPs the proposals would bypass and constrain the Parliament and Scotland's democratic choices. Tory Constitution spokesman Dean Lockhart argued that Brexit will actually bring a power surge to the Scottish Parliament and that rejoining the EU after achieving independence would be the biggest power surrender this Parliament has ever seen. The Tories proposed an amendment to the motion which reversed its meaning and committed the Scottish Parliament to working positively with the UK government to maintain the UK internal market. The amendment was defeated handily by all the other parties. The original motion was then passed with support from every party except the Tories. So, Andrew, if I could come to you first. I don't think the result of this motion will have shocked most people. The vast majority of Scotland's MSPs reject these internal market proposals as framed. Do you think this will have any effect on how the proposals are developed at Westminster from here on?
I don't think it'll have any impact, or I don't think it'll change the way in which the direction of travel that we're seeing from Westminster. I think that they are still hell bent on achieving the hardest of Brexits, and of manipulating the hardest of Brexits in order to defeat the devolution settlements that we've had across the United Kingdom for at least 20 years. What I think might change, however, is that as the debate and the discussion unfolds, the examples of the way in which this awful, terrible White Paper's proposals will impact negatively on the daily lives of the people in Scotland becomes clearer and clearer as more examples are worked out. So, for example, in the debate today, I heard something that I've spoken about before, which is that Scottish building regulations, which have been independent of England's for as long as I can remember, they are likely to be our building regulations, which tend to be slightly of a higher standard. They will be reduced back down to English levels with the sort of problems that we've seen with combustible cladding put on the outside of buildings potentially becoming an issue in Scotland. And another example that came up today was that, of course, the regulation of teaching is devolved to Scotland and has been, again, for as long as I can remember. And the expectation is that if there's a different qualification requirement across the so-called internal market, which there is at the moment, if you want to be a teacher in Scotland, you're still required to have a professional teaching qualification, and that is not the case in England. And so we are likely to see the standard and the quality of the training of teachers and the quality of teaching reduced as a result of the proposals laid out in this white paper. And so I think as people get to understand what this actually means in reality, then I think we'll see people's rejection of it starting to build.
And Daye, obviously, the rural economy is one of the sectors that's going to be hit very hard by some of these proposals in environmental regulation, animal welfare, food labelling, all of these kinds of things. What's been the reaction amongst farmers and others in that sector to the way these proposals have come forward?
It's been very slow, but interestingly, on Facebook recently, I did see quite a few farmers have woken up and they are starting to take note of what is about to descend upon them. One of the things that has always amused me, well, it hasn't amused me, in terms of building regulations and planning law, in England, it isn't illegal to build on floodplains. And you know what that has brought to the English populace. In Scotland, it's been illegal for many, many years. You cannot build on a floodplain. It's only common sense, which seems to be lacking down south.
Yeah. And Andrew, the Tories obviously made this argument that this would be a power surge because all of these powers are coming back from Brussels. They're just being filtered slightly at Westminster before coming to Holyrood. Do you think that's in any way accurate? Do you think there is some grain of truth to that this will be a boon in terms of powers that the Scottish Government can exercise, and that the rejoining the EU after independence, which is nice that a Tory recognised that possibility, that would actually reduce the powers of the Parliament, and that might not be something that people want to do?
Well, I'll say I'd left the field open for Daye to talk about Peter Chapman's interaction during the debate this afternoon. Mr. Chapman, as I understand it, said that he didn't care what the views of the National Farmers Union for Scotland are on this matter. And for a Tory MSP to be saying that indicates to us just how far down the rabbit hole they have gone. I think another point that was made in the debate was that whilst there is the beginnings of an outlining of a possible process in the white paper, there are no principles at all. And again, that draws sharp contrast with the way in which trade arrangements and trade agreements are made across the European Union, where, as you would expect with the European Union, the principles are set out and agreed first, and then we get to the process. But unsurprisingly, with a Westminster which is devoid of principles, there are no principles set out in this white paper at the moment. So I think it indicates that that principle-free aspect of what is being proposed tells us. It gives a lie to what is being intended here. This white paper is not about handing powers to the devolved administrations. It is about quite the reverse. It is about accruing more power to Westminster, and even more importantly, it is about damaging. It's about neutering the devolved administrations, and it is about causing unnecessary damage to the daily lives of the people of Scotland, Northern Ireland, and Wales.
Yeah.
And Daye, on that subject that Andrew raised there, farmers traditionally have been fairly kind of fertile ground, if you like, for Tories. And yet, as he was saying there, the Tories saying there, they don't care what the NFU has to say. What do you think is going on with the Tories that they seem so determined to turn their back on some of their core constituencies from years gone by in order to drive this whole Brexit process further?
Well, I think it's simply that they are determined to hang on to power, and the way they do that is to appeal to their base, and their base is no longer Tories like farmers, it's the Brexiteers, and the people who, frankly, I have absolutely no links with at all. I can't understand why people would think the way that they do. There's so little to be in tune with them about.
Well, we will obviously keep an eye on this as it develops, but we move on now to our next story. And England will scrap the government agency responsible for responding to public health emergencies after the country has suffered the highest death rate in Europe from the coronavirus pandemic. Public Health England, a cornerstone of the health system with responsibility for managing infectious disease outbreaks, will have many of its functions merged with the government's contact tracing service into a new body to be known as the National Institute for Health Protection. The National Institute for Health Protection will have a single and relentless mission, protecting people from external threats to this country's health. External threats like biological weapons, pandemics, and of course, infectious diseases, said Matt Hancock, England's health minister. Dido Harding, the former chief executive of internet provider TalkTalk and the current head of the much criticised English contact tracing service, will run the new institute. Andrew, I'll come to you first on this. This was first announced in a kind of late release to a friendly journalist on Saturday evening. We're now starting to get some of the detail. So I think the first thing to ask is in the middle of a pandemic the best time to replace your public health infrastructure?
Well, I think, Kenny, this indicates yet again that one of the problems that we have with the current Westminster government that it has no plan. This yet again smacks of policy, firstly being cooked up in the Cabinet Office amongst a very small coterie of chums who have little, if or no, understanding of the detail or of the challenges that an organisation like this has to handle. And I think it indicates to me also that the pool of people who are prepared to get involved in supporting Johnson & Johnson's administration is shrinking. Yes. Dido Harding, of course, is married to a Tory MP, as a consultant, has written at length about how she thinks the NHS should be scrapped and replaced with an insurance-based system. And for her to end up running an organisation like this, even on an interim basis, is I think it indicates that, one, the government is struggling to find people who have real talent and real ability, who are prepared to be associated with them. Secondly, it shows that they are determined to put in place ideological supporters, no matter whether or not those ideologues have any of the necessary qualities, let alone the education, let alone the ability that guiding an organisation such as this at this time would require. And the other thing that crosses my mind is that, of course, Public Health England is already a creature of a a dogmatic-based reform by a Conservative government. It was set up in an attempt to shift the blame away in previous circumstances, and potentially to set up a political fall guy for a situation just like this. And so here we see the Westminster government fiddling with the bureaucracy rather than focusing on the more important matters, such as saving lives and perhaps making sure that the same loss of life doesn't happen again.
Yeah. Daye Harding, she's a life peer, was given a peerage in 2014 by David Cameron. She has had some business successes in her own right, but this case here, she's been running the test and trace system since May, which we know hasn't worked well. It's been criticised by people from all stripes at all levels. It's just not getting the job done. Do you think this is just an example of kind of jobs for the boys, or rather jobs, in this case, jobs for the girls?
It's partly that, and I think what you have to remember is Daye Harding is not a successful businesswoman. Was she not the CEO of TalkTalk, which was a failure? So I wouldn't say she was a successful businesswoman, but she certainly is one of the Tory cronies. The other thing I come back to is this is Johnson appealing to the base, and the base are not your traditional Tory voters. It's the people that he swung from the Brexit party into the Tory party. And the traditional Tory voter is beginning to wake up. Many of them have already woken up, and there are all sorts of movements going on down south from traditional Tory voters who are absolutely shocked as to what is happening. And as the story unfolds from Carol and from Peter Gagan, who you had on the other night, and well done you getting him here, and also James, one of our very own. They have been working away for probably more than 4 years. I've been following them for 4 years. And they have been opening the door a little bit and a little bit further and a little bit further. And that story is right out there now in the public domain. All these links that there are between the various, like the Adam Smith Institute. I always thought Adam Smith was a revered, in his time, a revered person, but clearly not with this Adam Smith Institute. It's been taken over by very strange people with eugenics as one of their ideals.
Yeah. We do have a quote here from the Royal Society for Public Health on this story, saying, this is from Christina Marriott, who's their chief executive. We question the timing of an announcement to scrap our National Public Health Agency in the midst of a global pandemic and before any public inquiry has started, let alone reported. Andrew, just very quickly, it does seem like a very rushed kind of announcement. Do you think this is just a distraction from the failures that Public Health England has had, or do you think there is some deeper motivation behind this?
Well, I think it certainly will serve as a useful distraction. I don't know that it quite amounts to a fully fledged dead cat, but it certainly has caught the headlines, and we're talking about it now. So it's in that sense, I think it is being used as a distraction. I think also the manner in which the news was, as you say, released to a team journalist late on Saturday night, rather than, I don't know, the House of Commons being told, or some kind of statement from a minister. I know it would be nice. We know that Gavin Williamson has been, until this morning, has been avoiding the television studios assiduously, and we're possibly seeing the same issue here in terms that the one of the aspects of our cabinet, which is so poor, is that they are unable to stand up their own policy decisions and their own arguments, perhaps potentially because they are so readily and easily criticised for, and as you say, for example, dispensing with your public health agency in the middle of a pandemic.
Well, we move on now. And Marks and Spencer's will cut a further 7,000 jobs, it said today, as the COVID-19 crisis deals another blow to the struggling retail sector. It is clear that there has been a material shift in trade, and whilst it is too early to predict with precision where a new post-COVID sales mix will settle, we must act now to reflect this change, M&S said. Clothing and home trading in its stores remained well below last year, though online and home delivery were strong, said the retailer, which has a UK workforce of about 78,000. The 136-year-old company is seeking to reinvent itself after decades of failed attempts. In May, it said the crisis would indelibly change its business, and that would accelerate its turnaround plan. M&S said the crisis had shown it could work more flexibly and productively, with more employees multitasking and switching between the food and clothing and home divisions. Its use of technology has also increased. Last month, the company shed 950 store management jobs. Its latest cuts will impact its headquarters, regional management and UK stores over the next 3 months. And Daye, M&S obviously hasn't had its troubles to seek for some time, but this is a big, about 10% of its workforce to be cut over the next 3 months. Is this something we're just going to have to get used to now as this pandemic kind of precipitates the death of the high street that we've been talking about for years?
Yes, I think it probably is. And if you remember, was Marks and Spencer's not the first one to give up by getting local firms to make the underwear and the high quality goods that they were famous for and move their production bases overseas to the Far East?
It could be, I'm not 100% sure, but yeah.
Maybe my age is showing there, but I do remember there was a factory in Glasgow. I think it sits just off the M77 now. And that one, I can remember when it closed and the furore that there was, where the workers were replaced by foreign goods from overseas because it was cheaper to make. And Marks and Spencer's led the way on that. So they are quite brutal when they have to be.
Yeah. And Andrew, what do you make of this? We've seen, job cuts from numerous retailers in recent years. Are we looking at a situation where the high street really does have to change how it operates now?
Well, I've got one suggestion for you, Kenny. We've been talking already about Baroness Dido Harding this evening. As I recall, she was on the board of Sainsbury's and Tesco's. So perhaps
Yes.
in the midst of a pandemic, perhaps people who might, I'm prepared to concede she might have expertise in those areas. Perhaps people should stay in their lanes or stick to the knitting, and she might be able to help out Marks and Spencer's challenges and let Public Health England and the disease control and pandemic control organisations get on with doing what they're best at. However, that's not that wasn't your question, Kenny. I think we have seen an ongoing reshaping of retail in the Western world, and further afield than that, so a reshaping of the retail market around the globe. And I think certainly I seem to recall, I think it was one of the BBC's Dragons who was saying that he felt that the pandemic had accelerated the changes in the high street by about 3 years. So on the one hand, I think we're continuing down a path that had already been set. We can see that, especially in urban areas, we can see that now every day with the profusion of white vans that are flying around delivering continuously on behalf of online businesses. People I was with yesterday who haven't been out very much in the city were commenting on how many white vans there were running around delivering for Amazon and others. So I think we've seen an acceleration of the changes, and the problem with that is that if the changes are accelerated, then the shifts and especially in employment practices and in employment, which need to then happen in order that the workforce stays employed, albeit not necessarily behind a counter on a high street in a Marks and Spencer's, the changes to the employment sector, to the employment aspects of this, haven't had a chance to catch up yet. And I fear very strongly that means that there's a great deal of pain on its way for the workers who are involved.
Well, that last sentence there, Andrew, does feed well into our next story. A post-Brexit trade deal can still be made in time, a Downing Street spokesman has said. But the EU has warned that the deadline is drawing close. A trade agreement must be thrashed out in October at the latest, the EU Commission has said. But Downing Street says it is confident that a deal could be done in September, 1 month before time runs out. The comments come ahead of the latest round of negotiations between the UK and EU, which are due to begin this evening and continue until Friday. On whether the EU is confident a deal can be achieved in September, an EU Commission spokesman said, "We want a deal, we want to have an ambitious and fair partnership with the UK, and that we must come to an agreement in October at the latest." Daye, obviously this October limit is to allow time for the European parliaments to ratify an agreement, which has to happen, as we say, before the end of December. Do you feel any more confident, less confident than you were, say, a couple of months ago? Now you hear this kind of talk that we think a deal can be done this month.
No, I don't. Not least because I think the European Union leaders who are doing the negotiation, they've always been incredibly polite and diplomatic. However, the rumblings from the European nations don't always tally with the message that is put out by the negotiators. And I think they're just thinking, let them go. Enough is enough.
Andrew, we heard Michel Barnier say just a month or so ago that he didn't think a deal looked likely, given that the intransigence of the UK on certain issues, most notably fishing and the level playing field rules. Do you feel that this is going to be one of those moments where a rabbit gets pulled out of the hat at the last minute?
Well, Kenny, people will often say that in terms of negotiations with the EU, that is often the case. That a number of long through the night sessions eventually produce some form of compromise and a working deal. I think there are a number of challenges to that in these very different circumstances. I think the characterisation of the discussions as negotiations is probably pushing it, to be honest. I'm sure that David Frost, the Cabinet Office representative and National Security Advisor, I think he is now, I'm sure he's going to the meetings. I don't know that he's negotiating, and I don't know that he wants to be negotiating. There's precious little evidence of that coming out, and I think it's as likely as not that in order to continue to feed red meat to the hardline Brexiteers who Daye has been talking about, I think it's perfectly possible that we will see the elements in the Cabinet Office and hardline elements in the Conservative Party continue to drive to a no deal or an effectively no deal Brexit. And I certainly think that there's evidence in the press now of, as Daye says, European nations coming to the end of their tether with this. I think there's been a degree of commentary and discussion in the German press today and yesterday, starting to harden the line, saying that, as Daye says, fine, let them go. We need to. We're in the middle of a pandemic, and I should say a pandemic which gives an indication that the EU is strengthening. The EU's agreed commitment to increasing the borrowing approaches and to funding across nations indicates to me that when the rubber hits the road, the EU is becoming stronger and is demonstrating to EU citizens its merit and the benefits of EU membership. And so I think both the lack of commitment to a negotiation in the UK and an ending of the patience and the very diplomatic patience, but an ending of the patience amongst the around the EU capitals. I think the combination of those two things makes it less and less likely that we'll see any form of a deal at all.
Daye, if it does turn out that a deal isn't agreed by around the beginning of October, what do you think the reaction will be from the British public? Do you think people have yet grasped what no deal is likely to mean? Or do you think this is something where enough people are still ardent Brexiteers that hearing that no deal has been agreed will actually be a a positive for them.
No, I think, and it's not just the hardened Brexiteers. I don't think anybody really realises until it's gone. You don't realise what you've lost until it's gone. You don't really understand until it actually hits you. When the supermarket shelves start to be empty again, they will realise. But this time there will be no recovery the way there was with when the supermarket shelves temporarily went empty over the COVID-19 panic buying. This is much more serious.
And what is your feeling then about how people will react, say on January the 1st when things have changed?
Well, as I say, the shops won't necessarily be empty on January the 1st. It'll be a gradual emptying of the shelves. Do any of you remember when, I can't remember what caused it, but there was no bread to be had?
There was very heavy snow a couple of years ago, and there was no bread for several days.
Right, and the petrol strike as well, the fuel strike, and the shops were empty, and that sort of thing, and the 3-day week. This generation have never experienced anything like that, and it's only us old ones that can remember it.
Andrew,
oddly enough, they're the ones that voted for Brexit, apparently.
Andrew, what's your feeling about this? If we do get to October, we're looking at the last couple of months just counting down to no deal. What do you reckon the reaction of the British people will be?
Well, I think in part it'll be driven by the approach that's taken from Downing Street and from the Cabinet Office, and I think that approach will be what I think is called permanent campaigning. This is not an administration which has the talents and abilities to actually administer or to run the country, but it does have the brass neck in order to be permanently campaigning and permanently churning out meaningless and trite campaign phrases, and to be arguing that black is white and up is down just because they can and because they still think they're campaigning. So I think. I think there's that concern. I think there's an element of perhaps of the boiling of frogs, and I'll try and not use any more mixed metaphors. As the temperature rises on the population, if it rises sufficiently slowly, they won't notice what's happening until it's too late. To borrow from Daye, what she was saying, and I think there is certainly a concern of that. I'm not sure at the moment what proportion of the population or the electorate the fundamentalist, the jihadist Brexiteers are anymore. I think the polling suggests that, notwithstanding that the decision in the referendum was so close, I think most of the polling suggests that the majority of the population are now regretting or a majority of the population now do not want to see Brexit, and so I think we will see campaigning from Downing Street and the ERG and the Brexit jihadists, and I think that will continue to distract a sufficient proportion of the population that, as Daye says, it'll only be once it's potentially too late that the penny will drop. So I think coming off the back of a general election in England, which handed the Conservative Party a majority of, I think, around 80 seats, I think that if that indicates the mood of the English nation, and there's no reason to consider that it doesn't, then I think we will see a continued acceptance of the inevitable financial and other catastrophes that will unfold starting at midnight on the 1st of January, and I'm not sure yet that the English electorate are bothered about it.
Yeah, we will obviously keep an eye on that as time goes on. Well, we go across Europe now, and Alexander Lukashenko, the leader of Belarus, awarded medals for impeccable service today to law enforcement officials who have helped him crack down on protesters, demanding that he step down in the 10 days since an election they say was stolen. In an effort to clamp down on strikes that have hit some of the country's most important factories, the government also issued a message to managers of state-run plants telling them to ensure workers fulfill their duties or be disciplined. Lukashenko is under the biggest pressure of his 26-year rule, with no sign of an end to the protests and strikes over the election, which the president says he won with 80% of the vote, but protesters say was blatantly rigged. At least 2 protesters have been killed and thousands detained in the post-election crackdown. Many of those detained have complained of punishment beatings, cramped conditions, and starvation rations. Lukashenko also announced today that he has deployed military units to the country's western border in response to statements from European governments about the situation in the country. So, Daye, this has just dragged on now for over a week. The protests haven't stopped. There have been almost a general strike in Minsk. Do you think that Lukashenko can withstand this pressure?
No, I don't. It's a bit like when Poland got its freedom as well. And freedom's a word I probably shouldn't have used, because somebody on Twitter who's very politically knowledgeable said what he fears is the EU and the West interfering and trying to, make them decide between us and Russia. And really, we should leave it up to them, because the Belarusians know what it is that they want, and they know what it is that they don't want. So I just hope that we don't go in with big fat feet and cause problems.
Yeah, Andrew.
We need these countries.
Putin has said that. Sorry, Daye. Sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, we need countries like that and like Turkey to act as sort of jelly between one side and the other. And in Turkey, it's between the Middle East and the West. And Belarus and 1 or 2 other countries are the jelly between the West and Russia.
Yeah. And Andrew, we've seen these protests build and build. Putin has said that he would be willing to offer military support if other countries decided to kind of actively do something in Belarus. But it does seem that Putin is not particularly keen to go all out to defend Lukashenko. Do you think? Do you think this how the Belarus situation develops is going to affect the relationship that Western countries have with Russia just now?
Well, I think certainly Putin is a canny enough operator that he will be probably waiting to see in circumstances where I don't think there's evidence yet of significant Russian interference in the day-to-day affairs of the state. I'm sure there's some interference. There's interference here. But until we see significant interference from Russia in the affairs in Minsk, I think Putin will keep his cards a little bit closer to his chest. I would be unless there was a sudden collapse of the state as a result of the ongoing public protests and the strikes and everything else that is associated with the downfall of a dictatorship. And there is a little bit of deja vu here between, certainly I'm old enough to remember the fall of the former Soviet states. And so the events, I think one thing to bear in mind is that, political commentators have certainly said that things seem to take an awful long time until they don't take any time at all. And the fragile nature of dictators generally, I think, makes it more likely that we're going to see a regime change. I think it's only one tiny little example, but the news coverage of Lukashenko squaring up to a striking factory worker the day before yesterday and threatening to have him beaten up kind of tells you where Lukashenko's head is in all of this. And I think whilst he may be offering baubles to some of the security services, there is equal evidence of the security services understanding that they're obligated obligation is to the rule of law, not to Lukashenko, and declining to beat and cajole and threaten the citizens in a way that perhaps a dictator would like them to do. So I think all the evidence suggests that Lukashenko's jacket is on a shakier peg than it was before. And I think, I hope that unless there is significant violent unrest, that there would be no need of military action from any state, be it Russia or anywhere else, and that perhaps diplomatic means and diplomatic support and constructive diplomatic support would be a better and faster and safer route for everybody concerned.
Yeah, and we did become aware today of a Belarusian Solidarity Fund. This is to go to help some of the workers, for example, who are on strike, and also to provide legal aid to people who are challenging various actions by the government. If you just Google Belarus Solidarity Fund, it should be one of the first things that comes up if that's the kind of thing you wish to support. So far, it's raised about over £800,000 in the last 5 days. So there's clearly a lot of support out there. But we move on now. And countries led by women had systematically and significantly better COVID-19 outcomes, research appears to show, locking down earlier and suffering half as many deaths on average as countries led by men. The relative early success of leaders such as Germany's Angela Merkel, New Zealand's Jacinda Ardern, Denmark's Mette Frederiksen, Taiwan's Tsai Ing-wen, and Finland's Sanna Marin has so far attracted many headlines but little academic attention. The analysis of 194 countries published by the Centre for Economic Policy Research and the World Economic Forum suggests the difference is real and may be explained by the proactive and coordinated policy responses adopted by female leaders. Even after clear and frequently cited outliers such as New Zealand and Germany and the US for male leaders were removed from the statistics, the study found the case for the relative success of female leaders was only strengthened. Our results clearly indicate that women leaders reacted more quickly and decisively in the face of potential fatalities, said Supriya Garikipati, a developmental economist at Liverpool University, who's co-author with Reading University's Uma Kambampati. In almost all cases, they locked down earlier than male leaders in similar circumstances. While this may have longer-term economic implications, it has certainly helped these countries to save lives, as evidenced by the significantly lower number of deaths in these countries. So, Daye, this is something that we've talked about before. It was something that seemed obvious, but these two researchers have dug into the data, done proper statistical analyses, and have discovered that women have been better leaders during this crisis. Is that something that surprises you at all?
No. You won't be surprised to know that I am not surprised.
No. What do you think it is that these female leaders are doing differently? What do you think it is about female leadership that makes a difference?
It's possibly a genetic thing because females tend to be they have more genes for caring, for anticipating, for looking ahead, for being wary, for being cautious. And I observe it in my sheep all the time.
Yeah, the researchers, Andrew, they said that women appeared to be more risk averse when it came to people's lives, but they highlighted that these leaders had actually taken more risks with the economy by shutting down harder and faster and potentially doing economic damage in the short term. Of course, as our own Professor Devi Sridhar has pointed out, there isn't a difference between health and the economy. If people are dead, they can't spend money. If people are sick, they can't spend money, and they can't get back to work. Do you think this is something where we need to just think about how we do leadership generally, and maybe encourage more women into leadership positions, and maybe ease some of the men out?
Well, I was concerned for a moment there, Kenny, that I was going to be dragged into some gender debate that would serve nobody particularly well. So thank you for that. Thank you for that question. I think you're absolutely right. I think both in the administration and the running of countries, and also in the administration and running of large businesses, we have ample evidence to suggest that the predominance of white middle class men does not serve the enterprise well. And that bringing the abilities and the talents and the expertise and the blood, sweat, and tears and hard work of female women leaders into these enterprises is something that is long overdue. And the more we see of it, the more it is accelerated. Especially that now we have evidence of the benefits. I think the sooner we get around to that, the better.
Mm-hmm. And back in Scotland, Network Rail has said it will be working around the clock for up to 2 months to repair flood damage on the main Edinburgh to Glasgow line near Polmont. With the floodwater subsiding from the tracks, engineers have had the opportunity to fully inspect the 300-metre section of track damaged when torrents of water cascaded from the damaged Union Canal above. So extensive was the flood damage, initial assessments are indicating it could take fully 2 months to reinstate the line, though engineers will continue to investigate the extent of the damage before confirming a final estimate for restoring service. The force of thousands of gallons of water flowing from the breached canal bank has completely washed away sections of track and undermined embankments. The power of the flooding water also undermined and washed away overhead electrification masts and damaged others, and left dozens of uprooted trees strewn across the tracks. Daye, this is not obviously the same incident that we saw near Stonehaven, but actually a much busier bit of train line. Is this a question of lack of investment in our infrastructure to keep it safe? Or do you think this is more a sign that our weather patterns are becoming more and more extreme and we actually have to think about rebuilding lots of things to make them climate safe?
Yes, absolutely. I think it's a combination of the two. But I'm smiling because I happened to be on Twitter when one of my old colleagues that I used to deal with in Scottish government when I was involved in the Leader programme, he actually tweeted to the rail network, ScotRail, with photographs of the water spurting out of that bit of line. I think it was at Polmont. If it wasn't Polmont, it was pretty near. But there was evidence of how good Twitter is. I mean, that was actual live happening there and then. And he was able to alert them immediately as to a problem.
Yeah, Andrew, this is obviously we've seen the crash at Stonehaven, and now this. Is there just a lot of work to be done? Do you think to kind of get our infrastructure able to cope with these bigger rain events, these more intense weather events that we're seeing?
Well, I think that's right, Kenny. In a previous life I was used to that rail connection through Polmont every working day of my life for about 15 years. And I recall how regularly it flooded then, more often in the winter. But the sections through Polmont and Linlithgow and into Falkirk have often been troublesome with flooding in severe weather. I think there's an issue potentially, and actually I'm about to undermine my own argument. I think there is an issue with Victorian infrastructure. Now, the rail, as you pointed out, the rail line at Polmont, some of the components that have been damaged are less than 3 years old. The electrification of that railway line was a huge engineering undertaking and was successfully completed. And now it's been damaged by events that are related to the ongoing change in our climate. So I think there is a double whammy here. We can see lots of evidence that our weather patterns are becoming more extreme. And as a result, that is more likely to damage infrastructure. And the second component is that we still have infrastructure, and I'm thinking probably here more of the Union Canal than I am of the electrified railway between Edinburgh and Glasgow, but we still have elements of the national infrastructure which are very, very old. And so I think I would like to think that these events over a summer rather than over a winter, these events over a summer might indicate that, as you say, we require a different, we require infrastructure to be constructed to a different standard, and we require infrastructure investment as a matter of considerable priority. I know that the Scottish Government can point to, as I have done on the pavements during campaigns, they can literally point to infrastructure which has only ever been delivered by this Scottish Government. I can, if I hang out the window on the other side of the house, I can see the Queensferry crossing from here. But the need to be investing harder and faster in infrastructure, I think, is starting to become pressing. I'm thinking, obviously, railways are a challenge. Stopping canals bursting their banks is a challenge. And I'm thinking also, of course, of the A82, which has been closed again regularly over the last 3 weeks. And we really need a solution, a permanent solution to the rest, and be thankful. So, yes, I think there's a lot of investment required, and it's required quickly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, we move on now to our last story, which is about investing in infrastructure. Details of a voucher scheme to help ensure everyone in Scotland will have access to superfast broadband by the end of 2021 have been announced. The Scottish Broadband Voucher Scheme will provide funding of up to £5,000 to help homes and businesses not in the scope of either reaching 100% with the R100 contracts or planned commercial investment to obtain superfast broadband where providers may not ordinarily go. Interim vouchers of up to £400 are also being made available for premises where superfast broadband is planned for after the end of 2021, with an additional £250 for those in the hardest to reach areas. An online postcode checker has been launched to give homes and businesses information on superfast rollout in their area, as well as providing information on voucher scheme eligibility. So, Daye, is this the kind of thing we should be, is this the kind of thing we need to get superfast broadband into every home in Scotland, including the ones in more difficult to reach locations?
I'm in a quandary about this superfast. I just want a stable broadband, because mine leaped from complete dropouts to going at 100 miles an hour. And I just want stable broadband. It doesn't have to be super fast, but it seems to be impossible to achieve. And certainly, I know all our villages have got their experts on their community councils, and they really are working terribly hard to try and help us all out with different forms of getting broadband to their homes. But we've been here before, and the money's coming from central government, but it hasn't helped me.
Yeah. Well, I think that obviously this is part of the goal. But there's another part to this story, though. And around 23,000 low-income households without proper internet access will be helped to get online with the assistance of £15 million of Scottish Government funding. The investment, part of the Connecting Scotland programme, will prioritise disadvantaged families with children and young people leaving care. These families will get a device, 12 months of unlimited data, as well as technical support to get online safely and securely. Households will also be linked with a digital champion who will provide 6 months of training and support over the phone. Suitable recipients will be identified by local authorities and third sector organisations who apply to the programme on behalf of those they support. This second phase of the programme builds on an initial £5 million to get up to 9,000 households with people at clinical or high risk from COVID-19 connected online. Andrew, we've seen obviously during the pandemic some of the difficulties that people can face if they don't have a good internet connection. For example, there was this plan to get people with who were at high risk online so that they were able to be in touch with their doctors. We also saw some kids really struggled with homeschooling because they didn't have reliable high-speed internet. Do you think this investment is the step that we need to get more people who can't necessarily afford internet get that into their homes?
Well, I think, Kenny, the digital divide, as it's sometimes called, is a significant issue anyway, and is a challenge for low-income homes and other homes where, as you say, they do not have ready access to broadband and internet connections of any viable speed at all. And so, as a society, and a society which is digitizing very quickly, a society which, as a result of Westminster policy, requires those claiming benefits to be to use the internet to pursue their benefits claims. I think the need to close that digital divide was pressing anyway. But as soon as you asked the question, I was immediately thinking the possibility, I'll put it no more highly than that, the possibility of there being a second lockdown or a second wave, which leads to widespread school closures again. I think that simply underlines the need that in a digital world and a world that's affected by a coronavirus pandemic, we need quickly to digitize the population, especially those who are not yet online to the extent that they need to be. We need to prioritise and deal with that quickly. I know that education authorities across Scotland have different approaches. In the Highlands, I think secondary school children have Chromebooks. In the City of Edinburgh, I think secondary school children have iPads. So there have been attempts, but I am reminded of one of the responses in South Korea to the pandemic, which was to send to every household in the country a digital device with connectivity. And I would like to think that whilst we might not need to do something quite as blunt as that here, we do need to get on with this and continue investing if we're going to make the population more resilient for the challenges that it feels like that may be ahead for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, the most important thing, if you don't have decent broadband, you can't get Broadcasting Scotland. So that's the really important thing. That is just about all we have time for. So thank you very much today, and to Andrew for joining us. And thank you at home for joining us as well. This is the part of the show where we do have to ask you for help. As you know, we are entirely funded by donations. So if you are able to support us, please do go to broadcastingscotland.scot/register. Sign up there as a supporter, and your £5 a month helps us to keep developing what we do here at Broadcasting Scotland. If you're not able to support us financially, you can still make a big difference by following us on Twitter at BroadcastScot. Find us on Facebook. You can see the address on the screen, or you can just search Broadcasting Scotland. We should be the first thing that pops up. Find our YouTube channel, subscribe there, click the bell icon so you get notified when we have a show coming up, and like the videos there as well, obviously, and then share the shows around. That's what social media is great for. Recommend to people why you enjoy Broadcasting Scotland, and hopefully you can help us grow our audience that way. And finally, we've talked about this many times, but there are lots of opportunities here at Broadcasting Scotland and lots of places where we could really use a couple of extra bodies right now. So if you've got any interest in working on TV here in Scotland, whether it's behind the camera or in front of it, do please get in touch with us. We would love to hear from you. But that is absolutely all we have time for tonight. I will be back again tomorrow at 7. We'll also be at the All Under One Banner event. So, Andrew, I'm sure I'll see you there. I'm sure we'll be talking about it at length tomorrow night as well. So do join us for that then. But until then, have a great evening. Good night.